Hi, everyone. I'm Bernardo Tirado, and thank you for being patient. It's one of these things when it goes live, things go live. And I am super excited to be here with you today. I am here with Christoph Trappe. We're going to be talking about his latest book. And also, if there's any questions that you have from any of the mediums as to YouTube, um, and any of the other ones that you're joining us from, feel free to reach out and let us know. I'm going to bring Christoph over. Hi, Christoph. How are you?
Hey, doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
I'm super excited to have you. And again, I appreciate your patience since we're talking about going live. Everything that goes live, you have to just roll with the punches and figure out how it will work. So again, thanks so much. I realized when I try to be fancy and doing HD 1080, I just realized this app doesn't allow that to happen. So
Huh.
that's what it was. It was kicking me out because of that. Some things that you don't really, at least I didn't realize happens. So good to know. Next time I'll keep it at 720p.
Always something new to learn, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and we can get also learning just a little bit more about yourself and the book itself that you wrote.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. So, I grew up as a journalist. Was going to be a sports writer. Didn't work a day in my life as a sports writer. Interestingly, went right into investigative reporting, public safety reporting, those kind of things. And, one thing led to another, moved over into corporate communications, corporate marketing. And then, of course, at some point, we started calling that content marketing. Not that, but a part of it, right? We don't want to oversimplify it here for sure. And, my career really has focused on how do I connect with audiences? How do I stay in front of them? How do I share content that's relevant to them? Because here's the thing, whoever builds the best connection with your customers will win, right? At the end of the day, if you're memorable, if you share value, and that's kind of what I've focused on in my whole career. And it used to be that we do articles, and I still do articles. It used to be we do social media. And, people used to write books, and they still do. As you can see, I got, 4 books in the bottom carousel there on Amazon Live. And podcasting started taking off again a little while ago here, maybe in the last year or so. And I'm a big fan of podcasting. You were on, Bernardo, you were on my show, the Business Storytelling Podcast. And, podcasts are great. But when when companies start something new, they have no audience there. So if you launch a podcast, you might have, I don't know, 20 downloads or something like that, And so one way to actually increase that number and get in front of more people is to just live stream your podcast. We just did this right before this show. I interviewed you on my podcast, and basically that's the podcast. There's going to be very little editing. I'm maximizing everything I'm doing to stay in front of audiences. And I think that's what brands need to do. And some brands spend a lot of money on advertising. Not saying you need to stop, but there's other ways as well to show your authentic company self.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree. I initially started a podcast 10 years ago. And I must admit that I put a few episodes out there, not really thinking that anyone would listen. And I stopped. And then when I decided to go back to it, because I kept paying for just the analytics, I didn't realize there were so many downloads of just this particular content that I was sharing. So what got you, what made you, or what inspired you to go into this particular field?
Well, I wanted to be a journalist. When I grew up in Germany, there was always a guy in the weight room who had the best stories, and I thought, how do you know all those stories? And he says, I'm a journalist. So that's kind of how it all started. But then, of course, things evolve and you learn new things. Different, journalism was kind of changing, anyways, right? With the digital platforms coming up, and but I'm still a journalistic storyteller. And if you think about what we're doing right here, me interviewing you, you interview me. I mean, that's journalism 101, right?
Yeah.
Really is. So still do journalistic storytelling, just in a different format.
And so, you've been like the global top 14 content marketer, top 40 B2B marketer, and the top 40, or actually top 24 digital marketer. Love the fact that you've always been on top of your game. What would you what secrets can you share to someone who is aspiring to get to that upper echelon of marketing?
Well, first of all, you have to be out there. You have to share your story. I mean, think about what we're doing here, right? We're just talking about things, and people can make their own decisions whether they like me or they hate me, or they're somewhere in the middle. And so you have to be out there. Now, here's the thing: there's a thing called marketing Twitter now, and I'm not sure I'm like the biggest fan of it, but some big shot VP posted something about, well, maybe you would do better in marketing if you focus more on your company's marketing as opposed to participating in marketing Twitter. And I'm like, I don't disagree, but I also don't agree with this. And here's the reason why. Because me doing this doesn't mean I'm not doing my day job, right? I'm still doing my day job. I'm still, working. And as it is today, we're all working at home. Anyway, so the day never ends, it seems. Not complaining, but I'm just saying, it's much easier to work now than it was maybe when we had to go to offices. But don't be afraid to share your knowledge. Don't be afraid to get out there. Don't be afraid of learning new things. Now, here's the reality. Me doing live streams, I learned so much nonstop because there's always something new.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. I mean, I think the great thing about just getting out there, talking to people, it also allows you to really think on your feet and what messaging are you looking to provide. I think many times when you're not used to or feeling comfortable speaking, like being in public speaker, sometimes we wind up filling our language with us or filler language, and just being able to practice and not really worry about the fact that you're in front of the camera or the fact that you are specifically speaking to somebody that you've never met before. These are things that I do think become very important and critical, just to be able to not only practice that, but also thinking about your messaging. And I guess that's really when you think about content marketing or being in the marketing field, you're always thinking about what exactly is the perception, what exactly is the message that you're trying to gravitate towards. And I love the fact that the book that you've written was really about going live. And for those that are just joining us, I really appreciate you watching in, and feel free to ask any questions. I had a bit of a hiccup and I'm like sweating, and we were talking about project management. And as a project manager, I'm like, oh no, what just happened? And you were so even keel. You're like, don't worry, we'll get this sorted out. And I think sometimes just being able to roll with the punches is extremely important, especially because life is life. You're never going to be able to plan everything and predict everything. You just have to go with it. So tell us a little bit more about this book that you wrote about going live with your podcast and live streaming. How did you get that? What inspired you to write it? And what tips can people really gain from some of the things that they'll be reading from that particular book?
So, I've been doing live streams for maybe a little bit over a year here, roughly. And I started blogging about it over on authenticstorytelling.net. So I share certain things. And in January, roughly, I thought, you know what? There's really a market need. I don't see any books on this topic out there. I don't see, enough stuff that's being shared. So I couldn't find any other books on that exact same topic. So I went to my blog and I looked, what content do I already have? And I had about 20,000 words, which is, pretty close to having a book. Could be a little bit more. And I just kind of flushed it out a little bit. It ended up maybe 28,000 words, 29,000 words, something like that. So I added some things, added additional articles, and I just wanted to share the knowledge and, put it in a book. And believe it or not, books aren't dead. People still read books. And, that's kind of how I put it together. It is now available. And it really goes down into the nitty gritty of how do you do it? What are the things you need to think about? It does talk about mindset, also talks about technology. It talks about all those different things and what's your setup? Like, you and I, we got a fancy setup here of, we got a mic and a ring light and a 4K camera and all this stuff, but you don't need any of it to start. Now, once you get into it, I would recommend that you do a little bit more, like polish it a little bit more, because when I listen to shows and they have bad audio, it's the first one not to listen. I'm not listening to, right? I'm moving on. So just something to keep in mind. But to start, you don't need any of it.
You're absolutely right. And I tend to be very specific when I start to make any sort of investment. So I kind of test things out. And then as I realize whether or not I like it, I will actually make the investment itself. And if I think about even going into podcasting or even live streaming itself, the camera on your phone has such good quality. As long as you have like a good microphone that you can attach to it and they can hear you, I think that's what really matters. And it's ultimately, again, what is the message that you're trying to get out there? What's the audience that you're trying to create? And also the dynamics as to lighting and sound and background. But those things are, I would say, are after the fact, like after you realize, yes, I really like doing this. I've actually spoken to a lot of different people when they first heard that that I've had a podcast for quite some time, and they've always been scared. They'll just record themselves, and I will be very frank. When I first heard my voice on audio, I was just like, "Is that what I really sound like?" But then you kind of get used to it, and then realize, if you have good information that people want to consume, they will subscribe and they will follow you. If they don't, trust me, they're not going to follow you at all. So I do think that those are just a couple of things that really resonate with what you're saying in regards to being able to go live and actually leveraging the podcast as a way of being able to also syndicate and also make it easier for yourself. Because if you're an entrepreneur, there's so many different outlets. You have YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything under the sun. And when you're thinking about creating a podcast, I'm a firm believer of one to many, meaning do once, multiply many. And that way you just saves yourself time, whether it's transcribing your audio so that becomes a blog post, or taking some of your video and using the audio out of your video. So I love the fact that you've created a book that actually just lays that specific thing out. And what motivated you to actually make the jump into live stream? Because some people are very scared to take that leap of faith.
So it kind of happened by mistake, quite frankly. And, I, believe it or not, I published Content Performance Culture, which is also in your carousel on Amazon, last year. So January 2020. So I'm not going to say we're going to do a book a year, but that happened in 2020 and 2021. So I was promoting that book. I was on Jason Falls show, the Jason Falls show at the time. That's what he called it. Now it's Winfluence, one thing or another. And there's another one, Digging Deeper. And he was live streaming it, the recording, and he showed me how he did it, using Switcher Studio. That was the platform he used, and I think he still uses it, but on his iPad. And he just showed his iPad and it showed how easy it was. And I was like, I wonder if I should try that. And, that I just kind of tried it, and slowly and surely expanded channels. I would go to one channel, then I applied to become a LinkedIn live streamer. So I'm on LinkedIn. And all those different things, and then I live streamed it to Twitch, and just kind of played around, and try things. But really, I got to give Jason the credit for getting me started. And then, I had some projects where I work with Switcher Studio, which is who I use, which is that iPad. It's basically an iPad production studio, and just kind of fell into it like that. And then, of course, once I know how to do something, I'm eager to share it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that having someone to be able to give you that encouragement to go live, I do think means a world of a difference. And being able to put yourself out there. And I love these kind of conversations. I think one of the things that, especially during these times of COVID, and when you're producing content that's one way, meaning you're not really interacting with anyone, or it's through just text, it's kind of hard to feed off of the energy or any of that sort. So this does definitely help a lot altogether. And is there any tips for those that are going to go into or thinking about going into live streaming?
Any tips for people that aren't going to do it?
That would love to go into live streaming, like they're afraid to do it, but like you mentioned before, you had someone that encouraged you. What tips would you give them if you kind of look back then what you do now?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is you have to remember, if it's just you, I mean, you still got to have a little bit of a plan. You still need to figure out, what are you going to talk about? How long is the show? Some podcasters have very specific rules, and I got some rules too. For example, the time from when I do a live stream to the time the podcast publishes, I don't want that to be more than a month. Because think about it, Bernardo, you were just on my show earlier. And if I take 4 months to publish your episode, you're going to be like, what's this guy doing? Weird. And like, what's the point? Why is it going to take me 4 months? I'm not editing much of it, if anything.
Right.
So just kind of figure out, what are you trying to do? Who are you trying to reach? What are you going to talk about? Have kind of a rough outline. Basically the outline I follow is introduction, overview, some housekeeping things, talk with the guest, kind of wrap it up at the end. The wrap up could be a quick summary. I'll be quite honest, and you can tell me your thoughts on how you feel about this, Bernardo, if you would. Producing a show while you're also the host, like, there's a lot going on. Sometimes you don't hear anything. Like, you barely hear what the guest says because you're flipping around things, So yes, we make it sound like it's a conversation, but if you're the host and you do everything, it's actually a lot of work. Now you get better. I mean, do you agree with that or no?
I agree with you 100%. I know when I first started doing my interviews, I am so focused on all the things behind the scenes, whether I do the overlays, making sure I'm answering questions, making sure the lighting is there. Sometimes I'm like, you're having to listen as well. And so, yeah, I don't always have that luxury. I wish I had a whole studio. Sometimes my face is too shiny. I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to put makeup on to make sure my face isn't shiny because I have oily skin. But then at the same time, you just have to say, you know what? This is how I am, and you have to just go with it. And I do think many times it's a learning experience, and as you start to learn, you start to realize what will work best for you and what doesn't.
Yeah. So I got to show this to you. So I do have makeup within reach right here.
I forgot mine over there.
and and I can, cover girl. So I can put on my shiny hat or whatever. Now, I honestly probably haven't used this very much recently, but I used to use it all the time. Now I just wear a hat, I wear a hoodie, whatever. If you don't like me, you don't like me. It's not, my hoodie is not going to change that or whatever. But yeah, at first I was like, oh, I better touch that up. And, oh, why is that? But don't overthink it. Just start. People will listen. I mean, seriously. There were shows. So I'll give you an example. I publish so I do the live stream, and like what you did earlier, I think you did it. You have the countdown at the beginning, right? And so I don't have a countdown, but I got some dead silence where it just said starting soon. And then I got the opening music, and then I come on, whatever. So there's about 30 seconds where nothing is going on. Well, I published a podcast episode the other day where I forgot to cut that out, and I think what happened is I just put it in there as a placeholder, and then I forgot about editing it. I was going to do it later. I didn't do it. That episode was still listened to. Yeah. Like, I don't know. Maybe nobody noticed because nothing was going on. Maybe because they turned it on and then they got distracted and then all of a sudden it started, right? So it's maybe that. But anyway, my point is, a year and a half ago, that episode would have been in my top 2. It's not anymore today, right? Because the numbers have gone up. But my point is, it was still a really well-performing episode, and I don't even start it on time. I started late. So I edited it later, so now it should be fixed on all the channels. But don't worry about making mistakes. Roll with the mistakes. Take it easy. Relax. Stuff will happen. Promise. There's always something that happens. I think I said that on the show earlier. I said, I'm surprised there's not more issues when I live stream, but it happens. Just, roll with it.
It does. And I also think that we don't allow ourselves just to breathe when we're going through this process, because there's all this expectation that everything needs to be perfect and it needs to all go right. You need to have the right music for the intro and the right everything. And again, most of the most experienced podcasters or live streamers start somewhere. They weren't born just making it happen. And even those that have been doing it for quite some time still have things that they're learning along the way that they're like, oh, I didn't really know about that, or I should have done this differently. The other thing I'd also say that I think that I found very important is experimenting. Like experimenting with the content, see what do you like to talk about? Because sometimes people wind up staying in one specific area, one niche, but people are so multifaceted that they can talk about other things. It's just how do you bring it into the conversation, and not being afraid, just being yourself. And talking about being yourself, like I grew up pretty much in corporate. So when I first did my first episodes, I'm wearing like my button down shirt, my sweater. And then one day, I kid you not, I was talking to my friends and I was like, I feel so uncomfortable wearing this button down shirt. We're in a pandemic. I don't want to do this. They're like, so why are you doing it? I'm like, I just want to wear a black t-shirt. That's all I want to wear. I just feel comfortable. And I've been doing it since, and I don't regret it. And I do think sometimes we get caught up into our head as to whether or not people are going to listen to us or watch us. If they really like what you have to say, it doesn't matter what you're wearing. It's what you're providing as far as content is concerned.
Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, yeah, you're not going to see me on here with a tie, honestly.
I actually had something like that originally. If I go back to my first YouTube videos, I was just like, oh God, what was I thinking? But you know what? Again, you live and learn through some of these things at the end of the day. So I also want to be very mindful of your time. I know we kind of started a little bit late, and that was because going live, you never know what to expect. And that's exactly what happened this time around. So lesson learned: if you're going to go live on Amazon Live, make sure that you're using 720p, not 1080p, if that means anything for those that are watching, because that's exactly what happened. And that's why I couldn't go live when we were supposed to. But you learn some of these things along the way. Any last minute words or anything else that you'd like to share before we kind of open to see if there's any questions? Because I want to make sure that if there's someone watching that they have questions, we can answer them.
Yeah, and of course, people can always reach out, LinkedIn, authenticstorytelling.net. I'm easy to find, Christoph Trappe, just Google it. So my biggest advice is hop on the bandwagon now. Try it. It's really a low investment, honestly, other than time. And it's such a better way, in my opinion, to get good content from your experts. Invite your experts on the show, interview them. Just do it. I know it's a kind of a cliche, but it helps you reach more people. It helps you get better content. Plus, you need content anyways. And Bernardo, we didn't even touch on this, and we kind of forgot about it. Is then use the content everywhere. It's part of the COPE model, right? Create once, publish everywhere. So
That's right.
I use it on live, podcasts, articles. I put them in a book. Now I have a book chapters from articles. Like virtually every person that's quoted in my book was on my podcast. I don't think there's a person in there that was not on my podcast that's quoted. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong, but I think that's correct. So maybe there's one that hasn't been yet, but she's actually scheduled. So anyway, my point is constantly repurpose, use it, push it, throw it a parade, and try to get the most out of it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I appreciate you kind of raising that, because if you're looking to monetize or you're looking to give freebies away, there are many different ways of being able to do that without actually having to do double the work. That's one of the biggest mistakes I did when I first started 10 years ago, because I had a psychologytoday.column. I still do have a psychologytoday.column, psychologytoday.com column, and my blog and all this stuff. So I was posting multiple times, and this go around, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go back to do this. It makes your life so much easier, and you don't have to worry about, especially if you're an entrepreneur or if you're trying to get started, just make it happen. It will work. You can always edit it, and you can always find people. And then the last thing I would also say that I discovered, that I'm sure you've experienced the same way, Christoph, is people love talking about themselves. So don't be afraid to reach out to somebody and say, hey, would you mind joining my podcast? I'd love to learn more about what your background is. And they will most likely say yes. So don't be afraid to reach out to people if you're looking to have people join your podcast overall.
I totally agree with that. Also internally, if you do it for your company and talk to, like, really, I put it into these buckets. Internally, you have customers, potentially prospects. There's a whole strategy of inviting prospects on your show. You know what I mean? And just there's a fine line though, because if you only invite them because they're prospects, but then the show sucks, maybe you don't care because you just signed a new 6-figure client or something. But at some point nobody will listen to your show anymore. So you got to kind of decide how you're going to do that. But I found that to be a very good strategy actually to invite prospects. And then also thought leaders. I mean, I've had Seth Godin on my show, and people say, how did he come on your show? I'm like, I asked him, and he said yes. And that's everything. Joe Polizzi's been on there. I mean, Michael Brenner, Barry Schwartz, Christina Pote, all kinds of people. And I just same with you. Like, I ran across you. I thought that sounds interesting. I'd like him to come on the show. I just asked. We didn't even know each other until a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those that are watching us, Christoph reached out to me on Twitter to say, hey, I like what you're doing. Would you like to be a part of my podcast? I'm like, sure, why not? And vice versa. So it's just goes to show that if you're really interested in launching your podcast or live streaming, which I think is probably the better way of doing it, because you're live streaming, you can repurpose everything. You don't have to worry about certain things, especially when it comes to editing. But more importantly, you're able to get people to join your podcasts or your live streams. Just reach out, ask. People would most likely say yes. In the worst case, you get a no, and that's okay. Maybe it's a no for now, but maybe it's a yes for later. So never underestimate the power of just reaching out and asking people.
That's my motto.
Absolutely. So I am super happy that you were able to join me today, and appreciate your patience with my own hiccups over here. But at the end of the day, I wanted to just thank you so much for joining, and apologies for those that are watching. I have to readjust my settings, and this is what happens when you use a different product here. But if you're interested in reaching out to either Christoph or myself, you can just reach out to me at Professor Tirado on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and many other channels. And Christoph, you mentioned they can reach out to you on LinkedIn, and also on Twitter as well, right?
Of course, C-Trap on Twitter. Feel free to connect. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn as well. Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Please make sure you pick up Christoph's book. It is very insightful. It shares everything as to how to be able to maximize your time, as well as being able to leverage live streams. And again, the words of encouragement is just make it happen and see how it works. And if you're ever any questions, just reach out to Christoph or myself. We're more than happy to share all the things that will help you succeed as it relates to live streaming or podcasting. Have a great evening or great afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Take care.